Welcome. Today we're going to talk about Monday.com boards, and they really are the foundation of everything we do when looking at building our workflow out in Monday, and they become super important. Sometimes underutilized is the practice of taking a step back and really thinking about the structure of our boards and how we want to create them and for what reason. That can really influence what type of board we are going to create. Are we going to create a board that lives forever and receives requests through it and that we manage the task or activity ongoing? Or are we going to create a template? Do we need a project to happen over and over and over again? And is that something that we can look to utilize as a repeating process? And that's where our template can come in as being really useful within that process. So the first thing that we want to do is really take that step back. The way that we like to do it is just thinking about, is this something that I want to repeat ongoing, and will I need to start and stop this process and then create another one? And will that be a lifetime project? Will it be ongoing? That will then influence the decision you make. Do I create a board as a template, or do I create a board that is going to live forever? That can really influence the structure. So when you look at creating a template, it's really useful to think about the strategy there. A lot of the times people might come into Monday and they might think, oh, I'm going to drop this new project I'm working on. I'm going to quickly build it out because I've really got to start managing. And it's very common, and it's understandable based on workload or timings to get things done. What's really useful, obviously, is potentially converting that project into a template, but also just stepping back and thinking about, well, how is every future project going to run? What kind of data do I need to collect? What do I need from a reporting perspective? And that will then influence your decision. Do I take the time, step back to save time in the future by creating a template? So let's just get into the basics of a board. So when we're inside Monday, the first thing we want to do is click the plus button here, and I'm going to click a new board and I'm going to create it from scratch. Now I'm going to call this Josh's, and that's really going to be my starting point. Again, you can utilize the predefined templates inside Monday if you want to. You can then also create it from scratch. What I would suggest as a starting point when looking at what is my process or activity that I want to create is to keep it as simple as possible first, and forget about probably using a template. Just try to learn the basics around a board structure, and that will give you some real grounding in the utilization of Monday and how you want to manage it. Again, our first three options here are really self-explanatory. Do we want to private this board so only we can access it? Do we need to share it with external people? And we can set it as shareable. We then want to select here is really one of those things that gets often overlooked is the item terminology in the board. So it can become useful if you're tracking something other than tasks. Maybe you want it to be projects, maybe it's a HR board from your employees, maybe it's budgets, leads, clients, campaigns. It gives you the ultimate flexibility here to do anything. I could put cars in here and track cars. What we're going to start off and do is just create a board with tasks. It's really, the simplest example. When we create this board, we can see I've created as shareable, so it's shareable to anyone who wants to get invited in as a guest. The first thing I can do is I can change that board type. All our board management can happen here on the left with our three dots, and we can change that board type to now main, which means that anyone is going to be able to access that board. So once I change that to main, you can see I lose that little icon there, and it tells me this board is public and now visible to all team members. What I would suggest the first thing you do when you create your new board is really think about that terminology. Is task correct? All the settings and features that I can manage in my board are over here at the top right with these three dots. When I click on my options, here I've got a bunch of things that I can go in and do. We're going to look at these board settings here where I can change my item terminology. So if I click on that, again, it brings us back to that spot where we can start to change it. Okay, maybe we now need to track something else. We want to change it to budgets or items or employees. So let's change it to employees. And you can see our item terminology changes here. So from a usability perspective, this is just a critical little thing that can help people's adoption of the platform when it comes to utilizing this board. So let's go in and change it back to tasks really quickly. And we've now got our task there. The next thing I would look to do is, who do I want to have in this board, especially if it's going to be a template, and who do we want to connected to it ongoing as it gets used over and over again. Again, we can bring in a whole bunch of different people directly into this board, and we can create them as owners or non-owners. Owners or non-owners is really useful because it gives you control over who can do what on your board and what they can edit. So when I close that, we've invited one person. What I would then go in, I would look at the permissions. So again, at the top right, now 3 dots is kind of our hub to do everything. I'm going to look at my permissions. Now, depending on what plan you're on at Monday, you got different controls around permissioning, especially around viewing of tasks assigned to people, which is more of an enterprise feature. But you still have the capability here to edit content. So you can restrict people from being able to change a structure, deleting a column, changing a group. You might just want to ensure that they can only collaborate or write updates, and that's kind of the lowest form of permissioning. Again, remember, we're doing all these things down at a template level for this particular process, so it's going to make it really easy for any future projects to inherit this structure. We don't have to worry about the permissioning. We don't have to worry about setting up who's got access to it. We're doing that all inside the template and building out a really efficient workflow for any future projects that inherit that. After I've got my permissions established, I can look at some other things or settings within my board. So I might want to look at my notifications. A really useful one here where you can set the notifications at a board level. Maybe you want people to only receive notifications when they're assigned or mentioned, or maybe you want to mute all the notifications. So you can also, as a board owner, mute them all for everyone. So you have that control to get really granular from a notification perspective. Once we've done that administrative work on our board, and it's really important stressing on, how you're going to be able to take that forward and utilize it for those future projects. And that little bit of work at the start is really going to make it easy to manage ongoing. The first starting point where I would always commence is looking at the groups. So how do we want to structure this and stage out the groups within this board? So maybe we have stage A, we've got stage B, we've got stage C. You can see easily what we're doing here is we're just adding a new group using this button, and we can rename and recolor those groups if we want to. So really important, again, just for an overall structure and usability perspective, how you set up those groups becomes really important. Visually, it's easier to segment the work, and you can see the task group into their relevant bucket. Also becomes really powerful when we look at filtering or sorting or adding different views based on group. And so that should be really your first starting point, is to look at what do we call the groups, how many groups do we want, and then how do we manage them from an overall viewing perspective. Once we have our groups established, it's really then down to, okay, well, let's input our tasks. So we've got task A, we've got task B, task C, task D, and task E. So these really become the foundations of our board. We're building out this template structure. We know that we want to utilize these specific tasks, and we need to add some more. So we then have our task set. Once we have our tasks, we might want to nest even further and go down to our subtask level. So I might want to add a couple of tasks underneath. You can see it's giving us a little tool tip here, which is very useful if you're creating a lot of tasks. You can hold the shift and enter instead of using your mouse. And we're going to put these two in. So now we've got 2 subtasks nested under that particular task there. So we're starting to build out the structure. Again, maybe we want to use this status column here, but we want to set them to blank. We might want to use the date, but then our skills allow us to go through and identify what columns do we want to use in this board. So maybe we want a drop down, maybe we want a numbers column, maybe we want a timeline, maybe we want files. We can also go in and search for many more columns that we want to use and bring them into our workflow. Again, I think stressing the importance of columns is that, one, they're going to simplify and let you visualize your workflow and contain data within them, potentially to automate or even just to present that information as you work. It's also super powerful from a reporting perspective. So anything you want to report on, any data, is going to come from those columns in the board. So the more effort and thought you put into thinking about, well, what's the structure of these columns? How do I want to set them up? The better that outcome is going to be. And it's really powerful in terms of the columns. At a sub-item level, when we get down to our sub-items here, some quick tricks that we can utilize is the ability to copy those parent ones we just created. So if we want to save time, we want to inherit some of those particular columns that we've created at item level, we can just copy them down by selecting that option, going through and selecting the ones you want to copy, and then bringing them down there to the sub-item level. So you can see now I've got the same columns at an item and a sub-item level. I've got consistency in my structure, and I'm really starting to build out a board that I can utilize now moving forward as a template. Once you have that initial baseline structure, we've come in, we've administered the overall board structure, we've looked at the permissions, we've looked at the item terminology, we've looked at notifications, we've gone through and we've set up our groups, we've thought about the structure of this process. We've then gone through, looked at our items, set up our columns in our board, and also created some specific sub-items. The next things we can look at is what other views do we want to create within that board. So potentially as we go up to the top here, we can create filtered views. So we might want to say stage A. We just want to see where stage A is at. So what we can do is we can use that plus button. We can create a new table. We can filter it. We can select stage A and we can save it to that view. So now in our main table, we see everything. In our stage A, we just see stage A. So really easy, really simple, and that will then inherit that across any future projects. You can also do the same looking at different things like sorting. So I now want to sort this by the due date. So I can go to the column and I can sort it. So I can see now I've got my date sorted. If I go up the top here, I can save it to this view. So now I'm not only seeing stage A, but I'm also sorting it by the date. So you can see how we can start to build conditional kind of views around your workflow that are going to be powerful for you to just jump in and out of on the fly as you need to. Another really powerful feature is the ability to hide columns. So while I might contain a lot of data for myself that I use for reporting, I can hide columns from the team that they don't need to see because they're just working on that particular information. So in that view like that, they can see everything, whereas our main table shows all the data. So you can see how we can hide and refine columns in that way. Some other really powerful things with inside the board features are in our three dots here along the header is the ability to pin columns. So I can pin different columns when I scroll. So if I spin the status and the date, this means when I scroll to the right, those columns will go with me. So really powerful if you've got a huge board with lots of columns to just pin the data as you scroll across so you can see it with its relevancy across it. You have the ability to stretch out as well if you prefer a much bigger view in terms of the data. You can also conditional color, so you can look at coloring rows. So we color a row here based on a date is this month. So we can save that to that view as well. So that means that we can get some visual indications from our workflow set around our coloring. We can also set default values. So as we start to add tasks, potentially we want information preset. So we can set those default values. So that means that as I go through and I add a new task, it's going to automatically inherit that default information that I've set there at the top. So it can be useful to save time, or if you're trying to standardize information that gets submitted, that's where that becomes really powerful in that way. Again, our views are super easy to use. We can add other views like a calendar. We can add a timeline, a Gantt chart. Again, this is all transforming the data in the main view. And what's also really useful is that we can set these as the default. So in this example where we put stage A, we could set that as the board default. So now when anyone comes into that board, they're going to see that as the default view. What can also happen is you can lock that out. So I can say I want to lock that. So that means that anyone coming in here can't change these filters and reset them. What you've locked down as the filter and the information can't be changed by people coming into the board. So really useful in that way and how it can be used. The board's power really is built on the flexibility that it has to do the things that you want it to do. So investing the time in understanding some of the little features that can enhance the way that you're working is really powerful. Getting that structure right is critical. So thinking about your groups, thinking about your tasks and your subtasks or your items or whatever it is contained within your board. And then the reporting aspects of what do you want to extract from it? How can you automate the workflow? Is all driven from the columns in your board. Now, once we've defined this is the board that we want for this repeatable process, what we can do is we can now save that as a template. When I click that option there, you get the 3 dots to the left, and I saved it as a template. I now get this little wand that this board is now a template. So what that means is that any future project I create will inherit this structure. So again, I've just saved myself a bunch of time. When I want to create a new workflow or a project or an activity for this particular process, I pick up the template and I use it. In the instance where we have a board where maybe we're receiving requests and this board isn't going to be repeated or set up ongoing, what we do is we create a new board, call it request for example, and we change our item terminology to requests. We can see that this isn't a board that we would create as a template. This is a board that's going to live forever, and our items are going to be the requests that come through. So new request A, new request B, new request C. So you can see in this instance what we will be doing is be creating this group might be new, this might be just started, and then we might add a new group called completed. So every request that comes into this board is generating a new item, and then we're moving it through the board, the different workflow stages or the groups that we've created, to then manage our workflow. So this is the instance where taking a step back and thinking about the scale or the volume of activities, but also the type of project or a process and activity that you're managing can heavily influence what type of board structure you go with. Is a template the best approach, or is it best to utilize a board that can manage ongoing requests and activities because they're smaller, they're easier to manage, the scale is more efficient to contain it within a single view? So the same things can apply to this board that we did to our template. All the same features, all the different views are really powerful and enable us to build a workflow from that board that's easy to manage. If you just go with that two-styled approach, is it a template? Is it not a template? It will help you simplify and define the ways you're going to structure your Monday.com boards. If you go with that approach, it'll make it much easier ongoing to manage. It'll also make it much easier to make the decision from a setup perspective, how you want to do it. So they're just some of the quick tips and tricks that you can utilize when building out boards, deciding how to structure them, what type of approach to use, and how to get efficiencies out of your day by managing your workflow through Monday.